Look at her. Pathetic. She spent 4 years hiding out on a deployment just to avoid facing the real world, and now she doesn't even have the decency to dress appropriately for her own grandfather's memorial service. My sister Vanessa's sharp, mocking voice pierced the solemn, echoing silence of the packed church. She didn't whisper. She chose the exact moment the pastor stopped speaking to lean across the aisle, pointing her manicured finger directly at me. Over 100 people, our extended family, old high school friends, and half the small town community, instantly turned around in their pews, their eyes burning into me with collective judgment. I sat there frozen in my stiff, pristine Marine Corps Service Alpha uniform. I was a lieutenant, a combat logistics officer who had just survived a brutal, exhausting 14-month deployment, handling high-risk supply chains under constant threat. My plane had landed less than 2 hours ago. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My boots were dusty, and my eyes were red-shot from grief. My grandfather was the only person in this family who had ever truly loved me, a proud veteran himself, and I had broken every rule to make it here in time. But to Vanessa and my mother, I was just a target. "Vanessa, please, not here," I whispered, a wave of agonizing pain and suffocating exhaustion hitting my chest. "This is for Grandpa." "Don't you dare use his name, Chloe," my mother, Evelyn, hissed loudly from the front row, her face contorted in disgust. "You abandoned him to play soldier. You didn't help us care for him. You didn't even contribute a single dollar to his medical bills, while your brother Jason worked himself to the bone. You're a disgrace to that uniform." Jason sat next to her, wearing a smug, arrogant grin, nodding along. The whispers around us grew louder. "So disrespectful," a neighbor muttered, "showing up like that for attention." The public humiliation felt like a physical weight crushing my lungs. Unable to breathe under the sea of judgmental glares, I stood up, gripped my military cover, and walked quickly down the center aisle, the heavy oak doors closing behind me. The freezing winter wind slapped my face as I stood on the stone steps of the church, my breath fogging up the air. I leaned against a cold pillar, my hands shaking violently. I wasn't just grieving my grandfather, my soul was bleeding from a lifetime of stored-up cruelty from the people who shared my blood. Buzz. My phone vibrated aggressively in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text telling me to stay away. Instead, it was a notification from the base legal advocacy group. "Legal alert. Lieutenant Chloe Davis, a formal complaint has been filed against your active duty status regarding the fraudulent solicitation of veteran charity donations. A preliminary investigation has been opened." My heart completely stopped. I stared at the screen, my mind spinning into pure panic. Fraudulent charity donations? I had never touched a veteran charity in my life. Before I could even process the threat, a second text message flashed from an unknown number. "Unknown. Check your grandfather's old workshop before they burn it. They think they hid the paperwork, but they missed the bottom drawer." The tension in my chest tightened into a suffocating knot. Someone was actively trying to destroy my military career, and someone else was sending me cryptic warnings about my grandfather's property. I jumped into my old truck and raced toward my grandfather's house on the edge of town. As I drove, my phone began to chime relentlessly with notification alerts. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands trembling as I opened social media. Jason had already posted a massive public update on the town's community page. It was a picture of me walking out of the church, cropped to look as if I was flipping off the building. It breaks my heart to reveal this during our time of grief, but my sister, Lieutenant Chloe Davis, has completely lost her mind. She used her military clearance to access and drain our late grandfather's local veteran charity foundation, taking over $80,000 meant for disabled soldiers. Tonight, she showed up intoxicated to her memorial, insulted our grieving mother, and stormed out when we confronted her. "We are cooperating fully with the military police. Please keep our family in your prayers." The comment section exploded instantly. "Stealing from disabled vets? Lock her up," one neighbor wrote. "Disgraceful. Stripping her of her rank is too good for her," another commented. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, gasping for air as cold fury began to replace my paralyzing grief. The absolute disgusting irony was suffocating. For the last 3 years, I hadn't been draining a charity, I had been funding it. My grandfather had started a local foundation to help homeless veterans find housing, but when his health failed, the foundation fell into severe debt. To protect his dying wish and keep his pride intact, I had quietly funneled 70% of my active duty combat pay directly into the foundation's account every single month. My family thought the charity was surviving on Jason's brilliant marketing. In reality, my blood, sweat, and tears were the only things keeping those veterans off the street. And now, they were weaponizing my own sacrifice to destroy my life. I tore down the gravel driveway of my grandfather's estate, spraying rocks into the snow. The old property was completely dark, the silhouette of his beloved workshop standing quiet against the gray sky. But as I pulled up, my headlights caught something that made my spine go entirely rigid. A sleek, unmarked gray sedan with government plates was parked idly near the wood line. Through the heavily tinted windshield, I could barely make out the outline of a man wearing a crisp Marine Corps uniform. He didn't turn on his lights. He didn't get out of the car. He just sat there, his eyes locked onto my truck, observing me with absolute intensity. My breath hitched. Was it the military police? Had they already come to arrest me based on Jason's fraudulent report? I waited for him to open his door, my heart hammering against my ribs, but the sedan slowly shifted into reverse, backed down the driveway, and disappeared down the dark highway without a sound. A fresh layer of dread washed over me. I was being tracked, framed, and publicly ruined all at once. But I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I had to find out what was in that workshop. I sprinted inside the dusty, freezing workshop, the smell of motor oil and aged wood filling my nose. I found the old desk in the corner, grabbed the handle of the bottom drawer, and pulled hard. It was locked. I grabbed a heavy iron crowbar from the workbench, wedged it into the seam, and cracked the wood open with a loud splintering sound. Inside lay a thick, leather-bound folder labeled Foundation Audit and Will. I opened it, and as I scanned the documents under the dim light of my flashlight, the pieces of the puzzle violently slammed into place. My grandfather hadn't died of natural sudden heart failure, as my mother had claimed over the phone while I was overseas. The medical audit documents showed he had been under extreme stress because he had discovered that my mother and Jason had legally altered his signature on his business documents. They had quietly taken out a massive, predatory loan against his property to fund Jason's failing lifestyle. And when the bank threatened foreclosure, they secretly transferred the entire debt directly into the veteran charity's legal name, effectively framing the charity, and me as the registered cosigner for the financial collapse. My grief instantly hardened into a freezing, calculated military focus. The agonizing pain vanished. I was a Marine logistics officer. I solved logistical nightmares and exposed supply chain corruption under fire. My family thought they had trapped me in a corner, but they had simply handed me the target coordinates. I took out my phone, took high-resolution photos of every document, and securely uploaded them to the base legal advocacy server. I wasn't going to run. I was going to march straight into the lion's den. An hour later, I drove straight to the town's local community center, where the family was currently hosting the post-memorial reception. Over 100 townspeople were mingling, eating and offering condolences to my mother and brother, who were holding court at the front of the hall like grieving royalty. I pushed the heavy double doors open, my combat boots clicking rhythmically against a polished floor. The entire room went dead silent. The whispers started instantly, people backing away from me as if I were radioactive. My mother's face flushed with pure, venomous rage. She stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger at me. "How dare you show your face here, you thieving criminal? We've already called the local sheriff. Leave this town immediately." Jason stepped up beside her, crossing his arms, a look of complete triumph on his face. "You really are pathetic, Chloe. You thought you could come back here, flash your uniform, and get away with robbing our grandfather's legacy? Everyone knows what you did. You're finished." The crowd stared at me with pure disgust. My own family had completely poisoned the community against me. The audience's hatred was a solid 10 out of 10. "I wouldn't be so certain about who is finished, young man." A booming, authoritative voice echoed from the back of the hall, cutting through the tension like a chainsaw. The crowd parted instantly as a tall, imposing Marine officer walked into the room. It was the man from the gray sedan, Colonel Thomas Vance, the head of the Regional Military Criminal Investigation Division. Behind him walked two stone-faced local sheriffs and a state financial investigator. Jason's arrogant smirk instantly vanished. My mother froze, her glass of wine trembling in her hand. Colonel Vance didn't look at the crowd. He marched directly up to me, stopped at flawless attention, and delivered a sharp, respectful salute. "Lieutenant Davis, the Federal Financial Cyber Unit has completed the emergency review of the documents you uploaded to our secure server 40 minutes ago." He turned slowly to face my father, mother, and brother, his eyes cutting through them like ice. The sheer authority radiating from him made the entire room hold its collective breath. "Jason Davis, Eleanor Davis," Colonel Vance said, his voice echoing off the walls. "You filed a formal complaint claiming Lieutenant Davis embezzled foundation funds. However, a federal forensic audit of the charity's banking routing numbers shows that every single dollar entering that foundation for the last 3 years came directly from Lieutenant Davis's active duty military combat pay." The crowd erupted in shocked, frantic gasps. People began murmuring, looking at Jason in confusion. "But that's not all," the colonel continued, nodding to the state investigator who stepped forward and pulled out a stack of certified legal documents. "We intercepted the bank transfers last night. It turns out the $80,000 deficit in the charity wasn't taken by the lieutenant. It was illegally transferred into a private offshore account registered under Jason Davis's name to pay off his luxury car loans using a forged signature of the deceased." The reversal was absolute and devastating. My mother began to stammer, her face turning a deep, humiliated red. This is a mistake. My son would never. Chloe is manipulating the records." I stepped forward, looking my mother and brother dead in their terrified eyes. The emotional exhaustion was gone, replaced with an unbreakable, quiet dignity. "I didn't manipulate anything, Mother," I said, my voice carrying clearly to every single neighbor in the hall. "Grandpa kept meticulous records of the forgery before his heart failed. You didn't just rob the charity, you stole from the very veterans Grandpa spent his life trying to protect, and you tried to send your own daughter to a military prison to cover your tracks." Jason dropped his head into his hands, his knees buckling, as the two local sheriffs stepped forward, pulled his arms behind his back, and loudly clicked handcuffs around his wrists. "Mom, do something! Help me!" he shrieked, his voice cracking as his high society friends backed away from him in pure disgust. The same townspeople who had judged me minutes prior now turned on my mother and brother with utter revulsion. Neighbors began shouting insults at them, whispering about the sheer cruelty of framing a combat veteran. My mother fell into a chair, weeping hysterically as the reality of their social, financial, and legal ruin crashed down upon them. I looked at them one last time, my heart finally finding peace. "You said I looked pathetic in this uniform, Vanessa," looking at my sister who was cowering near the wall. "But this uniform represents truth, discipline, and honor. things this family will never understand. Enjoy the consequences. I turned my back on the chaos, walking out of the community center accompanied by Colonel Vance. The crisp winter air felt clean against my skin as we walked toward the trucks. "Good work, Lieutenant," the colonel said, giving me a supportive nod. "Grandpa would be proud." "Thank you, sir," I replied, returning his salute, before watching him drive away. As I sat in my truck, watching the snow fall quietly over the small town, a deep, bittersweet understanding settled into my soul. You cannot cure a toxic family with your own endless sacrifice. For years, I believed that if I gave more, if I quietly funded their lives, and if I bore their cruelty with silence, they would eventually see my worth and love me. But narcissistic people don't look at sacrifice as a reason to love you. They look at it as an open invitation to exploit you. True strength isn't about enduring abuse from people just because they share your DNA. True strength is having the discipline to stand up for the truth, draw a line in the sand, and walk away with your head held high.